Welcome and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Rausch. I am your own personal sales maven here to offer you tips, strategies, and techniques to master your sales conversation. Today, we're going to be exploring the other side of cognitive closure. Now, the reason I say we're exploring the other side of it is because if you listen to episode 308, where we were talking about why your brain is lying to you and how that's impacting your sales and what to do instead, this is going to flip that and talk about just like anything, like the idea and the concept of cognitive closure that we're going to talk about today. To assign any kind of like good or bad to it is probably a mistake. So instead, it's like that's the concept. Let's talk about the ways that it can be hurtful in a sales conversation. And let's talk about the ways that it can be helpful in a sales conversation. So today, we're going to focus on the things that are helpful about cognitive closure to really hopefully inspire you to take more action in your sales conversations and base it around this concept of cognitive closure. Now, cognitive closure is this idea that our brains want clarity. We crave clarity, and when we have clarity, it is very satisfying to the brain. And when we don't have clarity, we make it up. Okay? So, there are some ways that this can really work to your advantage in sales conversations. Um, so that's really what we're gonna talk about here. Now, the way that cognitive closure can really work to your benefit is when you are in the place of a sales conversation and you get to the close. Now, if you haven't heard me talk about before that I have a signature framework, it's called the selling staircase. There are 5 steps of the selling staircase. And the idea and the reason behind I teach this concept of a staircase is because most of us understand that you ascend a staircase one step at a time. And in a sales conversation, you don't stand at the bottom of the staircase and hop up to the top step and skip all the other steps, right? But of the 5 steps that I teach, step 5 is close. And I don't necessarily, I don't mean that that means you exchange dollars for services. What I mean is that you get close language out of your mouth, that you attempt to close because this brings clarity to the conversation. And closing in the selling staircase is the second most missed step. It's the thing that I find when people say, "Oh, well, I thought this person was going to buy and now they're ghosting me," or it seemed like a really promising, opportunity, and then, I don't know, it just kind of fell away, or the person changed their mind, or whatever. Usually, it's they're not actually closing, and because they're not closing, they're not getting the answer they need. They're not getting the clarity. And when you close, there are 5 things that happen, and I'm not going to spend time going through those 5 things. I know I've talked about them in episodes. I teach this often in the Sales Maven Society. I work with my clients privately on these 5 responses to close. But what I really want to talk about today is to encourage you to close and using the concept of cognitive closure as kind of the basis of how this works. Okay, so the idea of making um, closing oftentimes is, as the seller, it might feel like, oh, well, I don't want to put pressure on people, right? Like you don't want to be seen as salesy. You don't want to have to pressure people. You don't want to have to convince people. And frankly, none of those things are how you should be selling. None of those things are going to actually support you in being successful in sales, right? You shouldn't be pushy. You shouldn't put pressure. You shouldn't have to convince anybody. And frankly, you can't. So no reason to try. So I just noticed that a lot of times people feel anxious at this part of the conversation. And sometimes it goes back to, well, I want to be polite, right? Like I want to be kind, I want to be polite, but they don't think about that when they don't attempt to close, it leaves some unresolved, like there's no clarity for the buyer, and that allows for them to want to start to make up stories, right? As to what happened in the conversation and why they didn't feel good about it. If there is no clear ending, This is when our nervous system like activates, and clarity is what calms people. And so you don't want to leave a potential buyer feeling like unsatisfied with the conversation. And they may not be able to articulate why they're unsatisfied, but it just felt off. And that's because you didn't ask. So the idea is you shouldn't feel guilty for asking. You actually should look at it as you're providing clarity by issuing closed language, and this is being of service. This isn't a sales like tactic of pressure, right? I know, there's been great like movies about salespeople. It's like, oh, coffee's for closers, always be closing. But the thing is if you start to look at closing and issuing close language as providing clarity for the buyer so that they can decide what to do or say next, that is kindness. So think about clarity is kindness. I truly believe kindness is such an important piece of selling and showing up from a place of kindness. So the idea here is instead of using phrases like, okay, well, just let me know, because you think, oh, I'm being polite, or, take your time and just reach out when you're ready. Like these, these are, you're essentially confusing the buyer. You're not providing clarity. And then again, there's no resolution. So cognitive closure comes in. They're going to start to make up stories. There's no clarity, right? Of what they're supposed to do next. Just let me know. Like, let you know what? Like, why is it my responsibility to do those things? That's your actual responsibility as a seller to make it easy for people to make a decision. And that's all we're talking about here is making it easy. Doesn't mean the decision is going to be a yes. I mean, obviously that's what we're, hoping for, but at the same time, sometimes it's nice to just get the no so that you can move on. So clarity, super important. It invites a resolution. It isn't about pressure. So instead of saying things like, let me know, or take your time and reach out, here are some examples of things that allow for clarity to come in the conversation. You might say something like, would it be useful to decide today what the next step is? Or are you ready to get started? Or do you feel complete in this conversation? Or is there something else that would be helpful for you to have to decide? If they're saying, like, I need to think about it, for instance, do you feel complete in this conversation? Or is there something else that would be helpful for you to decide? Wait, see what they say. Or you could even ask, what feels like the right next step for you? Wait, see what they say. Clarity, because closure. Okay. So the idea is when you ask these types of questions, you don't need to rush through it. You can then wait and let the person respond and see like what questions come to mind, or what objection do they have, or what would be additional information that would be useful for them to have, and or they might let you know that they're not interested in moving forward, or maybe they need to think about it. Any of those things are useful, and we can do something when we get one of those responses. And sometimes, believe it or not, often you're going to get a yes. They're going to be ready to move forward with working with you. I hear this over and over how many times clients, when we first start working together, are so surprised that they close on their consultation calls. Like they've never closed on a consultation call before. We start working together, we work through the language. I encourage them with closed language. They get into the conversation and the person says yes and buys on the call. And they're like, that's never happened. Like it can happen. And the idea is your job is to make it easy. Your job is to provide clarity. And using these closed language statements or questions, which really are invitations, by the way, it helps you from rambling. It helps you from over explaining, and it just leaves the conversation with a natural end and or like resolution. So a couple things to be thinking about. I've mentioned kindness a few times in this episode already. The idea in sales is to show up from a place of being kind but not being nice. I don't know if you've ever heard anybody talk about this. I remember the first time I heard Shelley Warren talk about this. Shelley Warren has a brilliant podcast called Stacking Your Team, and a brilliant business where she works with people on hiring, firing, and inspiring, I think is how she phrased it. Their team members. She's so brilliant. If you have a team member or a team and you're looking to really up your leadership with the team, I recommend her. But when she talks about this concept of there's a difference between being nice and being kind. Being nice is just like doing the thing that you think the other person wants, but it may actually not serve them. This is my explanation. Shelley does a much better job than me. Being kind is doing the thing that makes the difference and doing it for the benefit of the other person. So it's not necessarily for my benefit here. It is for the other person. And sales really is about relationships, and it is about focusing on the other person in the conversation. So when you don't close, you essentially give the other person the responsibility of like doing all the work. And that is a mistake for so many reasons in sales conversations. It's not their job. It's not the client or the prospect's job to do all of the work. It's yours. So if there's ambiguity, oftentimes they just won't do it. It's kind of like, you're playing tennis and you're, hitting the ball over the net, and it's like we're passing the ball back and forth. When you pass the ball, chances are it's the client that's or prospect in this case that's going to drop it because they're not sure what to do. Like, what they're supposed to do next, but they often don't because they're busy. They have other things. This is not necessarily their only focus in life. This is the focus of your business, but it probably isn't the focus of their life or their business. Therefore, if there's ambiguity and they have to do all the work to figure out what they're supposed to do next or how they're supposed to make decisions next, like, no, they're not going to do it. They're going to drop the ball. Okay. And so they'll avoid it, right? They'll be like, oh, I'll just put it off. I have too many other things on my to-do list, so I'll put it off. And avoidance looks like ghosting, right? If you don't want to be ghosted in your sales conversations with a potential client who you really would like to earn their business, you can make a difference for them, you have to close. All right. So the other thing about ghosting is oftentimes it's not necessarily rejection. It's just unresolved like tension, or it's unresolved like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do now. And it feels like a lot of work to figure it out. So I just won't do it. So now it feels awkward and weird. And I'll start avoiding the salesperson because I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do or say. All right. So when you use closing and closed language in your sales conversations with your prospective buyers, you will see that you have much fewer stalled conversations. You also will have less emotional whiplash about like after the sales call of like, what happened? I thought that was going so great. And now I can't even get them to respond to me. What happened? That's that like emotional whiplash. Like, you don't want that because then that creates your brain to make up a story, right? We talked about that in episode 307, which is, like why your brain is lying to you after your sales calls and what to do instead. So when you want to have a more predictive sales process, you cannot skip the step of issuing close language for your benefit, but mostly for the client's benefit as well. So when there's no closure, both sides start filling in the blanks. They start making up stories as to what happened, what went wrong, why you don't want their business, why you don't think they're the right client for you, why, who knows what other crazy story that our brains will hallucinate. Okay, so remember, people feel safer when they know what is supposed to happen next. Decisions reduce anxiety, even when the answer is no, on both parties, right? Like it just like let's get some of the anxiety out of the sales conversations. And leading someone to a decision really is being emotionally intelligent. That's you doing the work. That's you being the guide in the conversation. And that is your job in sales. So closing isn't always about getting a yes. Often it's just about completing the conversation, leaving some clarity in the conversation feels so much better to both of you. So make sure you're issuing close. It also speaks to your integrity. I think it speaks to your confidence, and it speaks to the quality of what they can expect when they work with you. So these are all really important things of establishing know, like, and trust, credibility, authority, relationship. All these things really matter. So this is, one of those things that I spend so much time working with clients on, is that it really is about relationships. It really is about saying and doing the things that make it easier for the other person to be in conversation with you. That, I can't state this enough. Like, you don't need to close harder. You just need to close cleaner, right? Like, this isn't about being aggressive or pushy. It's just about being more effective. All right. So here's a couple questions for you maybe to think about, challenge yourself in this particular episode. Is I would ask you, where do you feel like you're leaving conversations open and you're doing it out of politeness? Think about, when's the last time you did that? Or is there a conversation recently where you left the conversation open because you were trying to be polite? And then the next question is, where might clarity actually be a kinder move in a sales conversation for you? And then, of course, what would change if every sales conversation felt complete? Think about what that might do for your mental clarity, for your time, for the, energy that you put into your business, for the money that you spend marketing, all of these things. So if your sales conversations are feeling heavy, if they're feeling awkward, it's not because you're doing too much, frankly. It's often because you're avoiding the things that bring clarity to the conversation. And closing is one of those things that absolutely has to be a part of the conversation. So if you feel like you need some help with that, getting better about closing, having some encouragement, having somebody guide you in those conversations, please reach out. It would absolutely be my honor to support you, because these are game changers in people's bottom lines in this idea of closing. I just actually was working with a client yesterday, and we were working on a project where somebody gave her a buying signal. We worked through how to encourage that person to get on a call, to elicit the information that was needed, and then put a proposal in front of the person. And that actually resulted in a significant amount of business. And it all happened within about like 36 hours. Like, it can happen for you too. Clarity matters. And when we put this like super easy decision in front of the person, they said yes, right? How great is that? All right. And then the last thing I'll leave before we wrap up is, most ethical sales conversations are the ones, sorry, not most, the most is what I'm trying to say. The most ethical sales conversations are the ones that really end with clarity. So thank you for listening. I am wishing you continued success, and I'm wishing you clarity in all of your sales conversations. All right. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks for listening. Take care.